And so where I want to start today is I want to start with talking about sports, as I usually do sometimes. It's either usually for me, sports or family. Like, take your pick. And so with sports, there's this moment where I was watching a video, and this happens often, where I'm watching a football clip, and the wide receiver who's there to catch the ball, he catches the ball, right? And he's running. He beats his opponent, and he's going. And you hear the announcer like, the 40, the 20, the 10, touchdown. Everybody's roaring, and everybody's excited. Everybody's celebrating, right? Everybody's so excited. But then all of a sudden, something happens. They begin to review the play, right? And this happens, guys. What happened is the wide receiver dropped the ball right before he crosses the end zone, meaning he actually didn't score a touchdown. It looked like it was a certain victory. It looked like it was a certain touchdown. I mean, there was nobody behind him. He was so fast, but yet he dropped the ball. In other words, the touchdown was negated because he celebrated early. He was so sure that he was going to score. And he wasn't thinking. He wasn't focused. Now, see, as an athlete, we have something that we call film that is equivalent to what they call in school case studies. Like, we have film where we review what we did on the field and on practice, but then we will watch other people's film when it's time to learn what not to do a lot of times. Things that maybe we didn't personally experience as a team, but we know we're not supposed to do them. And they'll look at a play like this and they say, no, you can't do that. Like, you have to be focused. You can't drop the ball. I want you to hold that ball until you make it back to the bench. Like, don't even give it to the ref. We'll give him another ball. Like, just to emphasize the focus of what they're supposed to be doing. I want you to finish the play hard because you never know. Something could happen. Like, we may need those points. We may need those points in the future. You know what? There may be a chance that you'll fail at some point along the way or some way early. So just make sure you're focused. Even in life, when it comes to like celebrating early, we have phrases. You know, we like phrases like, what is it? Don't count your eggs or your chickens before they hatch. I don't want to say it. Don't count your chickens before you hatch. I couldn't remember. I don't know. Yeah, you wouldn't count eggs before they hatch. I mean, they just eggs. Or we have another phrase like, one in the hand is worth more than two in the bush. Right? And so we have these phrases that tell us we shouldn't celebrate early. We should just, take what we have and focus on what we have. But here's the thing. As a believer, as a Christian, things are different. See, as a believer, we can celebrate as early as we want because God's promises are actually yes and amen. Like, they're permanent. They're already, if he spoke it, it's going to happen. We can celebrate early because even if anything happens, there's nothing that can happen that can stop God from doing what he said he's going to do. See, we can celebrate early because even if you fail, there's a thing called grace. And his grace is sufficient for us. Even if you fail, you should be able to count your promises before they hatch. Why? Because his promises are yes and amen. Even in the moments, if God gave you a bird in the bush and you have one in the hand, I say you should let whatever you have go in your hand and go focus on the bird that God gave you in that bush. See, we've all been set up. We've been set up to worship God, to celebrate God no matter what. We've been set up to celebrate God and to worship God no matter when. We've been set up to celebrate God and worship God no matter where we are in our life. And so the title of today's message is simply this: set up to celebrate. We've all been set up to celebrate. And so there was many stories that I could go to in the Bible about celebrating early, but there's one in particular that I think is going to help us today. There's one I want to look at. So I want you guys to turn to Joshua 14:1. Joshua chapter 14. I'm sorry, not Joshua 14, Numbers 14. I don't know why I said Joshua. Numbers chapter 14. Don't go to Joshua. Joshua's in the story. Maybe that's why I said that. Well, we're going to Numbers chapter 14 and verse 1. And let me set the stage here. So the context of what's going on when we get to Numbers 14:1 is this. The Israelites have escaped Egypt. They're in the wilderness. And they've been in the wilderness for 40 years, guys. 40 years. And they're at the tail end of their journey. They're about to go into the promised land. And God tells Moses, hey, I need you to send 12 spies. One of each of the tribes of Israel, representing the tribes of Israel, and go into Canaan Go into the land that God has promised them, and I need you to scout it out. This is what God told Moses to do. So he sends 12 spies, and they go into Canaan, and they scout it out. Guys, they're going for 40 days. I mean, they must have been doing some real spying for them to be going 40 days. But they're going 40 days, and they come back, and here's their report. They're like, oh, my goodness, the land, it's amazing. It's as bountiful as you said. It is a land, just like you said, it's flowing with milk and honey. Matter of fact, here's some fruit. They even brought back some fruit. It's like, here it is, guys. Here's some fruit. Look how good it is. It's just beautiful. It's awesome. It's excellent. But then the story continues, and there's this big but. They're like, but the people who are there are really, really powerful. They have large cities, and their cities are fortified. Like, they even have descendants of giants. And even outside of the giants, they have the Amalekites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and all the other ites that are there. They're all occupying all of this land. And so in the middle of all their doubt, because the spies are like, no, I don't think we should go and do this. Two of the spies speak up, Joshua and Caleb. And so Joshua and Caleb, they're trying to quiet them down and say, no, we need to go take this at once. We need to go take this land right now. We can conquer it. But unfortunately, the other spies, they disagreed. And so they started spreading the bad report instead of what God said. And so that brings us to Numbers 14 and verse 1. So let's read it. It says this: Then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt, or even here in the wilderness. They complained. Why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? Then they plotted amongst themselves. Hey guys, let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. I find this interesting here. Like, all they're talking about is Egypt, Egypt, Egypt. They're like, I wish we would have died in Egypt or even in the wilderness. You know, you're leading us to our death. You know, let's just go back to Egypt. Let's find somebody else that's going to lead us there. And so I want to look at some of the things that's happening inside of these verses about the way the Israelites are responding to what God has called them to do. So let's look at verse 3 and start looking at some of their complaining. It says, why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? I'm like, it's only been 40 years. So yeah, there may have been some people that died off since Egypt, but a lot of them should still be there. But they want to go back, and then they're like, why will we be in this place to where we're going to die right here in battle? I find it interesting that they think they're about to face some impossible odds. They think that they're about to die. Did they forget the odds that they faced when they were in Egypt? And the fact that they survived? I mean, think about it. They were slaves in Egypt, and they shouldn't be free. Like, they were slaves to Pharaoh, and there's no way they should be free, but they are. They're in this moment to where they almost died of impossible odds when they had the Red Sea in front of them, Pharaoh's army behind them, yet they survived. God parted the waters. They walked through while there was something separating the end of their line and the front of the Egyptian soldiers, allowed them to get through the Red Sea, and then God crushed their enemy. But yet they think they're going to go to this land to die, to these impossible odds. Or yet while they were in the wilderness, with no food except for what God gave them, manna from on high, did they not realize that God had already defied impossible odd after impossible odds after impossible odds? See, here's what's going on here. It's very difficult to celebrate a promised victory if your memory of God has already been defeated? It's really difficult to see in front of me and celebrate what God said he's already promised you if you're already in a defeated mindset. And so that brings me to point number one. It's never too late to celebrate what God has done. It's never too late to celebrate what God has done. Just watch this. The Israelites, they're screaming, Egypt, 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 Egypt. Wish we would have died in Egypt. Can we go back to Egypt? Egypt, Egypt, Egypt. And so they're focusing on what's happening, not what he has already done. That's a problem. See, God rescued them and brought them to the promised land. They're right there, but they weren't celebrating that. Have any of us been in that position to where we can't celebrate the fact that we're right on the cusp of where God has brought us to, because everything around us in that moment is absolutely terrifying? Because everything in that moment looks like there's no way we're going to be able to take that one last step to reach the victory that God has promised us. That's where they are. But I want to encourage you, you can't stop celebrating what God has done. And we're going to kind of look at why. We're going to build on to that. So let's keep reading in Numbers 14:3 and keep going on. It's crazy that they keep complaining. They're like, our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Our wives and our children are going to be carried off as plunder. I find it interesting that this is what I was getting when I read this, is when you stop celebrating what he's done, you begin to believe the lies. When you stop celebrating everything that God has already done for you, you begin to believe the lies. In other words, they started believing the outcome that was never intended for them. They started believing things that weren't real. And guess what? We do the same. I believe it won't get any better. I believe I won't get any better. I believe that I'll never, or this is not for me. And we start to believe these lies that the enemy plants inside of our head. Why? Because we stop celebrating what God has done. We forget that he's already done this. He's already made that better. He's already brought you through this situation, but somehow we forget that. See, God's first choice has always been redemption. It said that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So he did that before the foundations of the world. He decided that he was going to send Jesus down to redeem us. So his first intentions were always for us to have life. But yet somehow we want to believe that that's not the case. That it's not life and life more abundantly. It's a lot easier to see what he's doing when we celebrate what he's already done. But let's keep reading. Let's keep looking in verse 3 and what's really going on here. They keep going and they say, wouldn't it be better for us to return and go back to Egypt? And then in verse 4 it says, then they plotted amongst themselves, let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. This is crazy to me. They are considering returning to bondage. They are considering returning to persecution. They're considering returning to a life less than what God promised them. I'm not even talking about status quo. I'm talking about less than what God has promised them, because he promised them the promised land. He promised them Canaan, and they're considering going back. Why go back to what he brought you from? That's a big problem. It's a huge problem. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you wanted to go backwards instead of forward? I'm going to be honest, I have, just in case everybody's got it together. I'm going to be the first to say I don't have it all together. I've been that person to where I want to go backwards instead of forward. But let me help you understand the source of the problem whenever your mindset is there, because I had to walk through it on my own and had to walk through it, or some people walk through it with me. But I want you to understand, when bondage looks better than freedom, you've forgotten the one that actually set you free. Anytime in your life when bondage looks better than the promise that God gave you, you're actually forgetting the one who set you free in the first place. How do I know? Let's look at the Israelites. They're like, let's choose another person. Let's choose somebody else to take us back to bondage. In other words, what they're really saying is, okay, we have Moses and Aaron, and that's great. They got us here to Canaan. but I don't think they're actually going to get us into Canaan. That's what they're saying. So we need somebody else, not even to get us into Canaan. We want somebody else to take us back to where we're going. Like, they don't even trust them to get them back to Egypt. Like, why would you need to choose another leader to take you back to bondage? I think because they know Moses and Aaron were not going to turn around with them. And so here's this moment to where they're going to intentionally turn back to pain and away from their promise. They're going to intentionally go back in a direction. And I believe what's happening here is in their mindset, they're like, Moses and Aaron can't get us to where we're trying to go. They're so focused on them that they miss what God has done. See, don't mistake the help for the source. That's their problem. They're mistaking who God sent instead of being trusting in who God is himself. And a lot of us do it. And see, here's the thing. He's the source and he's the solution. People are just the middle ground. People are just who he works through. But again, he's the source, he's the solution. He's the Alpha and he's the Omega. He's the beginning and he's the end. Or I'll say it like this: don't confuse the carpenter with the tool. We need to understand that, because some of us are looking at the tools God is using and we're believing they're the carpenter. No, that's just who he's using. God is the one that we should be celebrating. God is the one that we should be trusting. And so when we realize it's God that we should be celebrating, what really happens is it shapes our perspective. It puts our mindset in the right place. Because we can't celebrate a victory that's over there, that's promised, if we have a mindset that's already defeated here. But what helps us to keep our mind undefeated here is remembering what he did back there. In other words, I'll say it like this to make it easier. How you remember what he's done will determine how you handle what he's doing. And it'll determine what you believe about what he will do. I'll say it again. How you handle what he's done will determine how you handle what he's doing. How you celebrate, how you remember what God has done. That's going to dictate how you act in this current moment. And so no matter what it looks like, I know some of us have had a crazy 2020. There's been ups and downs, roller coasters. Some of us have lost some friends and some loved ones. Some of us have lost our jobs. How you celebrate the good things that he's done and the fact that you're still standing here is going to dictate how you move forward into what's coming. It's never too late to celebrate what he's done. But now I actually want to go backwards in the text. I want to take a step back in the text because I want to look at something. Back into the context of where we were reading earlier, to where everybody was complaining and everybody was upset. And in the middle of all that doubt, Joshua and Caleb come in, and Caleb has this response. So I want to go back a chapter. I want to go to I keep saying Joshua. Numbers chapter 13 and verse 30. I don't know if I corrected that in the slide. Is it correct in the slide, Deontay? Okay. Numbers 13 and 30. And it says this: but Caleb, it does say Joshua. Y'all, that's not Joshua. So it's not Deontay's fault. Let me make sure I clear that up for everybody. That's on me. That's what I put in my notes. I don't know why I was stuck in Joshua. You can put it up there. Leave it up there for me. So it says in Numbers, actually, he's correcting it. In Numbers 13 and 30. Numbers 13 and 30. Just giving him time to do his magic. It says this: but Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go back at once. Let's go at once and take the land. He said, we can certainly conquer it. This is Caleb talking. Caleb say, hey guys, let's go right now. Let's go take this land. I know what the other 10 are saying. I know what the other 10 have already said, but we can do this. I'm going to be honest. If you ask me, this sounds like Caleb is celebrating. Caleb is celebrating before the battle, before the victory, before everything. See, he's not distracted by the moment. Caleb's not distracted by what he sees. He's believing what God said, and he's like, let's go do it, y'all. Let's not drag our feet. Why are we dragging our feet about something God has already promised us? Why are we being slow about this? Why are we still deliberating? Why are we still talking about this? Like, let's go do this right now. We can certainly conquer it. But what I love when Caleb says we can certainly conquer it, he's not building his confidence or talking about the confidence in his own ability. He's talking about the confidence that he has in God's faithfulness. God said it, and so it's going to happen. Let's go do it right now. And one way Caleb is actually celebrating is like, let's celebrate God in our obedience. Yes, your obedience is a form of celebrating God. Your obedience is a form of worshiping God. Because your faithfulness says, God, I'm going to trust you. Your faithfulness to God says, God, I'm going to do it in spite of whatever it looks like. And when you have that mindset, and just like Caleb's position, you're celebrating God before the victory, before the battle, before whatever happens. And so that brings me to point number 2. It's this: it's never too early to celebrate what God said. It's never too early to celebrate what God said. See, for some of us, what happens is we miss God in the moment and where God is working in the moment because we're misled by the moment. We're distracted by everything that's going on. God is working in and through all the things that is happening in our life, the good and the bad. He's in it all. But because we're so consumed by what's going on, we get distracted. Don't let life distract you from what God is doing. Don't let the circumstances and the situations distract you from what God is doing. See, the Israelites, they got distracted. And as soon as they got distracted, what did they start doing? Complaining. Egypt. Let's go back. Wish it would have died. All of this, nothing positive, just complaining. I believe that what happened is they forgot that it was just a moment and it wasn't the end. I believe they forgot that what they were going through was just temporary and God's promises are permanent. I believe they were just stuck in this moment like, what in the world is going on around me? I can't take this. And they forgot that God was working in the moment still with them because he promised them. And so like Joshua and Caleb, we have to have the mindset that we're going to celebrate God, who he is, and what he said, and not complain about the capabilities of the giants in our lives. We can't sit up there and complain about what the giants are capable of. We don't have time to worry about the giants. See, the giants' capabilities will never, ever stop God's plans. And I know some of us right now in life, we have giants in our lives right now. I don't know what it may be for you, but I know what it is for me. And those giants are trying to stop me, but they can't stop what God has planned and promised for you. And so no matter the lies that you have stuck in your head, I dare you to celebrate God. I dare you to get a worship in your spirit. I dare you to get something bubbling on the inside of you to say, God, I'm going to trust you. God, I'm going to believe you no matter what the lies are, because I know that these lies can't stop your plans. I know this giant that's in front of me, they can't stop your plans. I know you've had some setbacks in 2020. I know some things didn't look right. I know you had your plans. You had A to Z all lined out, and then Corona came in and threw in letters you've never even seen before. But guess what? They still can't stop what God has planned and promised for you. And so I dare you to start celebrating God and start worshiping God. I know you've made some mistakes. We all had some decisions that we had to make this year, and we didn't know how to make them. There were things that we've never seen before. There was nobody we could ask about it because they've never seen it before. But guess what? Even if you made those mistakes, they can't stop God's plans and promises for your life. If God said he's going to do it, he's going to do it. And so that's the mindset that we have to celebrate God from. See, the only thing that can stop God's promises, and it really doesn't stop, it just moves you out of alignment, is if you choose to stop celebrating God on the way. His promise is still there, waiting on you. And we may go here, his promise is still there. We may go here, his promise is still there. We may take 3 steps back, his promise is still there. And so it's up to us to keep moving, to keep celebrating him. And so it's never too early to raise a hand. Like, there is no such thing as celebrating God early, like for his promises. That just, it doesn't happen. Like, we can always raise a hand and say, God, I thank you for what you're going to do. I thank you for the promises that you've already given me. I thank you for the things that you said you were going to do in my life. I thank you for bringing my children back because you said you would. God, I thank you for allowing me to have a job to provide for my family because you said you would. God, I thank you for being my source. It's never too early to start saying, God, I thank you, to celebrate who he is and what he promised you. I know it seems strange to celebrate a promise that looks impossible, but our God can defeat the impossible. And we have to realize that. See, our hope isn't defined in the moment. It's defined by God's faithfulness through eternity. Period. And so if our hope is defined by God's faithfulness through eternity, then we should celebrate him based on that. That he is faithful through eternity. And so if we want to be good at celebrating, if we want to be good at celebrating what he's done, if we want to be good at celebrating what he's doing, if we want to be good at celebrating what he said, we have to do something that the Israelites weren't good at, guys. They were really good at complaining. Really good at complaining. But they weren't that good at celebrating God. And so point number 3 is this. There's never a good time to complain. It's the last point. There's never a good time to complain. Now, I'm not saying there won't be opportunities to complain. I'm not even saying you're not capable of complaining. All I'm saying is there's never a good time to complain. And let's see, we were created to celebrate God, not complain. Period. We were created to celebrate, not complain. I can prove it to you because in the book of Psalms, it's full of celebrating God, making a joyful noise, praising him with the instruments, praising him with our voice, praising him with joy, praising him with the whole heart, praising him with gratefulness. Why? Because he's our strength. He's our shelter. He's our shield. He's our song. He's the one that holds us up. He's everything that we need. And so we were created to celebrate him in spite of what it looks like. And so what I'm saying is there's always going to be an opportunity to complain, but there's always going to be a greater reason to celebrate God. The choice is ours. We're always going to have the chance to say, you know what, this stinks. And I'll be honest, I've said that quite a bit this year. I'll use my phrase, this is trash. This is just trash. But even I had to be convicted of this. There's always a moment to complain. There's always an opportunity to complain. But I want to flip my mindset to no matter how bad it may look, there's always a greater reason to celebrate God. We were set up to celebrate. And so I want to prove this to you in scripture. I want to go to John chapter 16 and verse 33, because I find this interesting what it says here. It says, I have told you all this. And when he says all of this, he says that, I'm going to leave, but I'll return. This is what he's talking about when he's talking to the disciples. I've told you all this about me leaving and returning. This so that you may have peace in me. Let me say this. It's much easier to celebrate when you have peace. It's real hard to celebrate when you don't have peace. Like when there's a lot of chaos, when you're focused on the things around you. But he said, I told you this so that you can have peace. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. In other words, you will have many opportunities to complain. Tons of them. He's telling us, you're going to have some reasons to say this is trash. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. One of my favorite verses. When you think about it, it doesn't make sense to the natural mind that he's already overcome things that haven't happened yet. He's already overcome your situations. And I believe that's why the Bible says to count it all joy when you find yourself in these moments and in these situations that can be painful. We're supposed to celebrate him. Why? Because he's already overcome it. And so I know some of you may have lost your job. Guess what? I dare you to celebrate because he's already overcome it. I know some of you may lost some loved ones, but I dare you to celebrate because he's already overcome it. Matter of fact, I know some of you are some of the best extroverts that I've ever met in my life. And you hated 2020 because you couldn't see your friends. You couldn't hang out with your people the way you wanted to. Guess what? Even you, I dare you to celebrate God for what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. And I know some of you are introverts. I'm partially an introvert sometimes, and I thought 2020 was going to be great. I didn't have to deal with everybody all the time, and so I had my moments. But even people that are introverts in 2020 got locked into their shells, and they felt some depression. And I dare them to even celebrate and watch God bring them out of where they are. Even where you are, getting a bad doctor's report, I dare you to celebrate. Celebrate because he's already overcome whatever is bothering you. Celebrate because he's already seen this and he's already seen what's next. He's already seen your future. He's already seen what's promised you, but we have to celebrate right now. It's never a good time to complain because there's always a time to celebrate. We always have an opportunity to celebrate God, no matter what. But something happens. See, when we start to celebrate and worship God in the moment, in the middle of our circumstance, something happens. We begin to agree with God's promises. Like we hear it and we begin to agree. Like, God, no, I really believe that. But then we begin to think of what he said and not what's happening. So now we're focused on his word and we're focused on who he is. And then we begin to realize that, well, if he has more in store for me, this really is just a moment and this is not the end. And we begin to trust his promises and respect the process. We begin to understand that temporary will never be greater than eternity. See, celebrating puts me into position to understand who God is. Celebrating puts me into position to trust God, to know God, to begin to understand his word. Celebrating him allows me to know that the God I serve is bigger than any problem that I will ever face. Why would I complain about a situation when I serve a God that's always worthy of my celebration? Constantly. Guys, we were set up to celebrate because we have a God that never, ever fails. And so as I get ready to close, there's one last thing I want to point out. Complaining is always going to draw critics. Anytime you complain, somebody's going to criticize your complaints. And in my opinion, like rightfully so. Why are you complaining? Joshua and Caleb. They were the critics of the Israelites' complaints. But let me tell you this. When you celebrate, you're going to draw critics. When you're celebrating what God has promised you, you're going to draw critics. Look at Joshua and Caleb. The Israelites, they were the critics. The other 10 spies, they were the critics. There's no way we're going to be able to do this. And what's interesting is that the Israelites in their doubt outnumbered their trust in God. All I'm saying is this, is sometimes there's going to be more people that are doubting what God has told you than the people that are going to celebrate God with you. Don't let that frighten you. What I want to encourage you to do is grab those faithful few. You grab those few that says, you know what? I believe what God has promised you. And those are the ones you worship with. Those are the ones you pray with. Those are the ones you celebrate God with. Those are the ones that you constantly say, I believe in God with. Those are the ones that you allow to hold you accountable. Those are the ones that you allow to encourage you, and y'all encourage each other. Y'all remind each other of what God said. There's always going to be somebody there to criticize what God has told you to do. I'm encouraging you to do what God has called you to do. Just think about it. Out of everybody that was there, only Joshua and Caleb entered the promised land. A lot of times your critics aren't going to be able to go with you, so why waste time on them? Allow them to see what God is doing and let it move on their heart the way God wants it to move on their heart. But God is giving you a mission. He's giving you a calling. He's giving you a direction to go. Celebrate him for it, no matter what it looks like right now. It's been a mess in 2020. I dare you to keep celebrating God. He set you up that way. Seek me first, is what he said. Watch all these things get added to you. Don't worry about everything that's happening in life. I got you. I'm the one that's going to supply all of your needs. I'm the source. I just sent them to help you, but it came from me. And when we can celebrate that, I believe that God can do some things in our mindset, in our hearts, in our relationships, and through us that we can't even imagine. And so start celebrating what God has already done. Start celebrating what God has said. And for the most part, for everything that we have inside of us, let's try and stop complaining. I'm making that commitment today. Next time I see something and I feel like it's trash, I'm going to say, you know what, God, you're great. And my family's probably going to look at me. We could get a flat tire and be like, God is good. You know how you look at people like that, but I really do believe. Like I will look at them like that. It's like, bro, really? No, this stinks. But what opportunity am I going to take in that moment? Who's watching me in that moment? What seed am I sowing in that moment?